They told us it was a burial ground. Then they said it was a calendar, then a temple. For over a century, experts have been confidently wrong about Stonehenge, and every time they thought they had the answer, the ground beneath it revealed something that shattered everything. In 2020, scientists pointed a radar into the earth and found something that should not exist. Something so large, so precisely engineered, and so deliberately hidden that it didn't just rewrite the history of Stonehenge, it rewrote the history of human civilization. What they found raises a question that no one in mainstream archaeology wants to answer out loud. Were the people who built Stonehenge far more advanced than we ever allowed ourselves to believe? Stay with me. Because by the end of this, you will never look at those stones the same way again. It started with a radar signal that didn't make sense. A team of researchers from the Stonehenge Hidden Landscapes project had spent years scanning the ground around the monument, not the stones themselves, but the miles of earth surrounding them. They weren't expecting to find much, maybe some old pathways, perhaps a few unmarked graves. What the radar returned stopped them cold. 20 enormous shafts, each one over 5 meters wide and at least 5 meters deep, arranged in a mathematically perfect circle spanning nearly 2 kilometers in diameter. Not scattered randomly, not vaguely circular. A precise, deliberate, engineered ring buried just beneath the surface, invisible to the naked eye for thousands of years. And that was just the beginning. As they expanded the scan, 17 additional structures emerged from the data, previously unknown, never excavated, never even suspected. Features so large and so carefully placed that researchers initially questioned whether the equipment was malfunctioning. It wasn't. What this radar revealed is that Stonehenge, the iconic ring of standing stones that millions of people visit every year, is not the monument. It never was. It is the centerpiece of something vastly larger, a prehistoric landscape of extraordinary complexity, stretching for miles in every direction, designed with a level of intentionality that modern archaeology had never attributed to Bronze Age people. The question isn't what they found. The question is why it took us this long to look. Here is where it gets deeply uncomfortable for historians. When researchers analyzed the placement of those 20 shafts, they did not find approximations. They did not find rough estimates or close enough geometry. They found precision, the kind of precision that requires advanced mathematical knowledge, careful surveying across long distances, and the ability to execute a plan that extended far beyond what any single person could see or measure. The shafts form a circle so geometrically accurate that, when plotted on modern mapping software, they align within margins of error that would challenge trained engineers working with contemporary tools. Bronze Age people were not supposed to be capable of this. That is not an exaggeration. That is the actual position that mainstream archaeology held before this discovery. The assumption was that Neolithic and Bronze Age communities in Britain were relatively isolated farming groups capable of impressive physical labor but limited in abstract planning and geometric sophistication. The shafts destroyed that assumption entirely, because building a 2-kilometer circle with this level of accuracy, without satellites, without metal tools, without written mathematics, that requires a system. It requires a way of encoding and transmitting geometric knowledge across generations. It requires specialists. It requires an institution. In other words, it requires a civilization that operated nothing like what we assumed. And the shafts are only one piece of evidence, because when researchers turned their attention to the stones themselves, they found something that archaeology had never thought to measure: sound. Acoustic researchers brought specialized equipment inside the stone circle and began measuring how sound behaved within it. What they recorded was not random. It was not coincidental. It was, by every measurable standard, intentional. The arrangement of the stones creates an acoustic chamber. Voices spoken inside the circle are amplified. Echoes, which would naturally occur when sound bounces off large stone surfaces, are instead absorbed and redistributed in a way that makes sound feel like it is coming from everywhere at once. From the stones themselves, from the ground, from the air. Certain stones, when struck or when exposed to specific sound frequencies, produce resonant tones, consistent, repeatable pitches that behave less like rock and more like the components of a musical instrument. But the most significant finding was something the human ear cannot consciously detect: infrasound, low-frequency vibrations below the threshold of hearing that the human body registers not as sound but as sensation. Researchers found evidence that the geometry of Stonehenge, combined with specific atmospheric conditions, may generate infrasound frequencies within the monument. These frequencies are known to produce measurable psychological effects, heightened emotional states, a sense of awe, disorientation, and in some cases, experiences that people describe as spiritual or overwhelming. If the builders of Stonehenge understood this, and the precision of the design strongly suggests they did, then the monument was not simply a place to gather. It was a machine. A machine designed to alter the emotional state of anyone standing inside it. That changes everything about why it was built. Now consider the stones. The large sarsen stones at Stonehenge, the ones that form the iconic trilithon arches, came from Marlborough Downs, roughly 25 miles away. Moving multi-ton stones across that distance without wheels, without metal, without draft animals capable of pulling that weight, that alone is an engineering achievement that took researchers decades to partially explain. But the blue stones are a different story entirely. The smaller blue stones at the center of the monument were traced through geological analysis to the Preseli Hills in Wales. That is 150 miles away. Across open water, across terrain that would have been largely wilderness 5,000 years ago. And then, in recent years, geological sourcing identified stones at the site with origins in northeastern Scotland, over 700 miles away. Let that settle for a moment. People in Neolithic Britain, a culture with no writing, no metal tools, no centralized government by any definition historians previously accepted, were sourcing specific types of stone from locations 700 miles distant and transporting them to a single, carefully chosen point on the Salisbury Plain. This does not describe a farming community that occasionally gathered for religious ceremonies. This describes a culture with advanced maritime capability, long-distance trade networks, geographic knowledge spanning the length of the British Isles, and the organizational capacity to coordinate labor and resources across that entire distance over multiple generations. The monument did not emerge from a local community. It was the product of a continental-scale operation. Every visitor to Stonehenge knows about the summer solstice alignment. At sunrise on the longest day of the year, the sun rises directly over the heelstone and sends a beam of light into the heart of the monument. It is the most famous astronomical alignment in the ancient world, but it is the least interesting one. Deeper astronomical analysis revealed that Stonehenge encodes alignments with the lunar standstill cycle, an 18.6-year cycle in which the moon reaches its extreme northern and southern rising positions. These alignments are subtle. They require not weeks or months of observation, but decades, possibly centuries of accumulated records passed from one generation to the next before the pattern even becomes visible, and the monument captures it precisely. Researchers also identified alignments with specific star positions as they appeared in the ancient sky, positions that have since shifted due to the axial precession of the Earth, meaning that to identify these alignments, researchers had to calculate where those stars would have been thousands of years ago. And there, in the geometry of the stones, they found them encoded. This was not a civilization that looked up at the sky with wonder and built a rough approximation of what they saw. This was a civilization that watched the sky with scientific rigor, preserved that knowledge through generations without written language, and then built it permanently into stone with enough accuracy that we can still decode it today. Let's be direct about what all of this adds up to. The hidden shafts reveal advanced large-scale geometric planning. The acoustic properties reveal intentional manipulation of human psychology through architecture. The sourcing of stones from 700 miles away reveals organized maritime trade and long-distance coordination. The astronomical alignments reveal generational scientific knowledge preserved and applied with precision. No single one of these findings fits the conventional model of Bronze Age Britain. All of them together don't just challenge the model, they collapse it. What the evidence describes is a society with functioning institutions. A society capable of making decisions that would not pay off for generations. A society with specialists, engineers, astronomers, acoustic designers, maritime navigators, whose knowledge was preserved, organized, and deployed toward a single monumental project spanning centuries. That is not a farming community. That is, by any functional definition, a civilization. And it raises the most uncomfortable question in the entire field of prehistoric archaeology. If these people were this advanced, if they understood mathematics, acoustics, astronomy, and large-scale engineering at this level, what else did they know that we have not yet found? What else is still buried? Here is the question that every researcher who has studied these findings eventually arrives at, and that none of them can fully answer. Was Stonehenge a ceremonial site, a place where communities gathered to mark seasons and honor the dead? Or was it something more calculated than that, a structure specifically engineered to create awe? To generate emotional experiences that ordinary people could not explain and therefore could not resist. a monument designed not to serve a community, but to demonstrate to anyone who entered it the overwhelming power of whoever built it, a machine for manufacturing belief. The stones have been standing for 5,000 years. The radar has been scanning for less than a decade. The shafts were hidden for millennia directly beneath one of the most studied sites on Earth, and we only just found them. Which means the only honest answer, is that we do not yet know what Stonehenge truly is. But we are closer than we have ever been. And what we are finding suggests that the people who built it understood something about human beings, about what we feel, what we fear, and what we worship, that we are only now beginning to rediscover. If this changed how you think about history, share it with someone who still believes we have it all figured out. And if you want to go deeper, the next video will take you somewhere even older, even stranger, and even less explained. It's already waiting for you.